When you build a headquarters or a hub space, right, that is a manifestation of your brand, you're communicating to a whole bunch of different stakeholders, not just the people who work on site. And so you have to kind of open your mind up to
I gotta stop you. I gotta stop you in a good way. I've done, this is now like my 12th episode of the podcast, I think. And, we talk about, we've learned a lot over the last couple of years over the workplace. Say what you just said about say that again, manifestation of your space is a manifest. This is what I want out of the podcast, Carrie. These nuggets, like I'm going to steal this. All right. Welcome back to another episode of Connected Conversations. Today, I feel very fortunate to have this guest with us. We have some really exciting stuff to talk about. Today with me, I have Carrie Aldridge. She is the Director of Strategic Insights for CBRE. And we have some exciting stuff that she's going to talk about that's coming out here in the near future that's going to help us guide us into the future of occupancy planning. So with that, Carrie Aldridge, good morning. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Carrie, as we like to start these podcasts, I love to hear people's origin stories, right? And what I like about talking about folks from the industry, especially somebody like you come from a similar background that I do, where once upon a time, you're a space planner, a workplace planner. Can you take us through your statement of qualification to why you're qualified to speak to us today on the topic of the future of occupancy planning? Take us through it.
All right. So I have spent the last 20 something years in a variety of corporate real estate roles. I have done workplace strategy, technology strategy, occupancy planning, event planning. I have been all over the place. And it really started with doing space planning and furniture specification for Herman Miller, and doing project management for various commercial furniture, contract furniture dealerships. From there, a little storm you may have heard of, Hurricane Katrina, took me from New Orleans to Dallas. When I relocated to Dallas, eventually got on with the Frito-Lay facilities team. And you may know Frito-Lay is part of PepsiCo. And that was an amazing experience at Pepsi, because at Pepsi, I had a different role like every 6 to 9 months. And I went from being the CAD manager, doing all of the AutoCAD drawings, to doing space planning, project management, doing lead project management, and eventually wound up implementing a CAFM system for the North America portfolio, and then expanding that out globally. And it was that project that basically I raised my hand for, just to exercise a new muscle and get a new experience, right? It was that sent me down the route of CRE technology. And eventually I wound up helping Citibank by managing their real estate technology tools. I then went on to work and help stand up the global PMO at Coca-Cola here in Atlanta, where I am now.
Coke or Pepsi? Hang on. You have to answer. No, you have to answer it. Coke or Pepsi?
Frito-Lay from Pepsi, and a great Sprite from Coca-Cola. That's a great pairing for me.
That's okay. All right. I'll let you. I put you on the spot, so I'm going to let you. I'm a Pepsi.
Yeah.
Guy. Like I don't know why. Yeah. I'm like, like, I feel like nothing, both brands are great, but I feel like most people lean towards the Coca-Cola side. And I'm always like, oh, you have Pepsi. That's great. But anyway, carry on.
It's an interesting dialogue for sure. And being from the South, Coke tends to dominate the soft drink side. But I got to tell you, everybody loves a good Dorito or a Cheeto. And don't forget that that's part of the Pepsi family too.
Yeah, so carry on. I didn't mean to derail you.
Sure, no problem. So at Coca-Cola, I helped stand up the PMO organization over there, and eventually jumped from the end user side, where I'd spent the majority of my career, to the service provider side. And I went and did some technology consulting, some occupancy planning sales, and am now in this role as Director of Strategic Insights, CBRE, helping tell the story of occupancy management data.
So what I really like about your background is similar to mine, but more extensive. Meaning, I think you spent a little more time on the functional end user side than I did. I spent about 5 years. I sat in facilities departments. I was a space planner, but I really think it's a great path because as you matriculate through your career, you take those things that you understand in these different roles by practically applying it as a workplace planner, as a project manager for technology implementation for end users, and then you get to a CBRE, and then you can speak the language of your prospects, your customers, and people who ultimately consume your insights. Because to me, that's invaluable. That if you haven't been there and done that, how do you understand how to apply, the insights or the technical to the functional? And I think that makes you a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah. That variety of experience has really served me well. Not only did it really open my eyes, on the end user side, it really helps me understand what is motivating all the decision makers and how CRE fits into the larger, business priorities, right? But also then the technology experience gave me a little bit of exposure. I can speak geek, but I can also speak end user enough to be that liaison to get everybody to talk together and be able to call out when something is slipping through the cracks or not meeting expectations. So it really is that variety of experience and that broad set of experiences that, I tap into that every day. Me
too. And that's what we try to do. And that's why I want to do this podcast. I've been at this 20 years, functional side, been in the facility departments, worked with a number of clients over the years, have seen things go right, seen things go wrong, and can really kind of talk the talk and speak to the Carrie Aldridges of the world so that we could have a relatable dialogue that also, is something that's fun and engaging. So I want to touch on something that you just said before we get into the meat of our conversation, where you said what's important to decision makers. From the day I started in facilities and corporate, boy, has that changed. That has really changed. Because when I was a space planner, it was like people get a phone, a desk, a PC, and then just make sure everybody's where they need to sit. Let's make sure the allocations are correct. Nobody's fighting over a couple cubes. But that's really changed, hasn't it?
It has changed big time. And you're right. It used to be about executing a list of design standards, down to plants. I've worked in organizations where, the size of the plant that you get in your office or in your workspace was part of the design standard. It was kind of a command and control tactical sort of situation.
Yeah, it's very tactical.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll share, I feel like this story, this little anecdote here sums up how dramatically things have changed. Okay. I used to work for a guy who once told me, no one ever left their job or took their job because of their workspace. And I remember, this was 20 plus years ago, and I remember that feeling wrong at the time, but not really having any data and not really having an industry of research and a community to kind of push back on that idea, right? So here was a real estate leader, a decision maker who really felt like his role was about the financial bottom line, about creating an efficient space based on these guidelines and standards. And 20 years later, absolutely, we all understand that the workspace is going to either attract or repel.
Does that person still have a job? Are they still working?
Well, as you can imagine, that person retired because that was just a different generation. And you know what? He was a product of that environment. I'm not saying it was right or wrong, but it was a comment very much of the time.
Well, my dad used to say to me early in my career, my dad worked for the state of New York for 26 years in the prison system. And was like, and I was changing jobs. every 2 years or so. And he's like, what are you doing? You can't be changing these jobs. You gotta find a place, because he's thinking I'm going to retire. I was like,
yes,
I had to sit
with
him
a
down,
watch.
and I had to sit him down and explain to him. I was like, Dad, I'm not going to retire from any of these companies. None of these companies that I don't work. I don't, I don't work for the state of New York. That's not how things work in this. And that's because the workplace has evolved, our careers have evolved, and things are much different than that's probably the baby boomers, the boomers and back has had that mentality, right, Carrie? It was very like, you come in, you punch the clock 9 to 5, you got your desk, you got your computer, and you got your phone. So those
boomers and traditionalists really had that, I need to build loyalty, I need to build longevity, I need to build relationships in the organization in order to have a viable career. And, I'm a Gen Xer. I have seen the value of having a variety of experiences at a variety of organizations. And it's really served me well to have those experiences. And I got to tell you, at the beginning of my career, I was a little wary of jumping around, and having those different experiences. Now I'm so grateful that I did it.
Me too. Like, I'm a Gen X, and it's so funny because they talk about the different generations in the workplace.
Right.
And as a Gen Xer, we did the same things. We did the exact same things, again, at different scales. Yeah. And then it landed us in places where we can sit down and have a conversation, which is a great segue for kind of today's topic and what we do on this season of the podcast. So this is season 2, and we branded this season Back to the Future. So when I think of Back to the Future, I think of the Back to the Future Part 2, where good old Biff got his hands on the almanac, the sports almanac. I'm sure do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm right there with you.
All right, so Biff got his hands on the sports almanac and then went back to 1950, and Biff became rich because he had all the data, right? So in a couple days, this is going to come out after this happens. CBRE will be releasing its Global Workplace Occupancy and Insights Report for 2022. No joke, over the last 5 years or so. Now, you can tell me this report is not 5 years old. I don't remember how far back I go, but I've been reading this for the last few years. I wait for these reports to come out. I send them to my internal teams. I send it to prospects and customers. This report, I feel like, especially with our topic is going back to the future, I feel like a little bit this report is our sports almanac, because at the end of the day, the data is everything. Right? Me, Bob, and Carrie can sit here and tell stories from back in the day and how things have evolved, but without the data, there's nothing behind it. Now, on this podcast, I've had Carolyn Cirillo from Herman Miller Knoll, excuse me. I had Ryan Anderson from Miller Knoll. These are folks with the data, and you're one of those people. So I'm really excited to talk about this. I'm going to consider this our sports almanac. So talk to us a little bit about the 22 occupancy workplace and occupancy insights report.
Sure. Yeah, I love talking about this. I don't know how much time you're willing to give me, but I could talk about this all day, unlike a sports almanac, which I can't even, touch on. So the insights report is the culmination of a year's worth of gathering benchmarking data. We work with our clients to gather a certain amount of benchmarking data every year, and then cull through that data, take anecdotal conversations we've had with clients, case studies that we've developed over the year, and basically identify themes that are influencing occupancy management, trends that we need to respond to, but also get an understanding of which direction certain data points are going into. For instance, like the most common metrics that matter to organizations, things like people density and space density in terms of square foot per person, square foot per seat, and try to get an understanding of where those metrics are going. We then try to contextualize those, themes and put them in a report for folks to enjoy, right? So we also offer the supporting information, that benchmarking information to our clients to go a little bit deeper on. But it's the insights report that gets the widest distribution. It's available to the public, right? So in that insights report, what you typically see are, some juicy stats: square foot per person is going up, square foot per person is going down, the average workspace size is X, that kind of stuff. But this year, we went in a little bit different direction and tried to understand the signals that are impacting occupancy management as a whole. And we identified 3 basic themes. And the first one isn't going to be a surprise to anybody. It's this idea that flexibility is changing how we work.
Sure.
And the purpose behind flexibility is changing how we deliver services, how we deliver technology, and then also the actual layout and design of space.
Because that can't be forgotten. That can't be forgotten, because at the end of the day,
no.
people are gonna say, I want to work from home, right? They're gonna want to work from home, and they're gonna want, like we are, right? I'm in my home office. I imagine you're in your home office, but there are people who do need to go into the office, and there are times when you will need to go into the office. So occupancy planning is still super important, because you have to create a space that people want to come to, and all those things that we've talked about, but it can't be forgotten.
Yeah. Flexibility, let's not confuse flexibility with total 100% remote working. Flexibility is navigating through spaces in the way you choose, working wherever you feel productive. It's not a binary, you're either in or out, you never go into the office. It's kind of situation.
And I think that gets lost in the sauce. I do.
Absolutely.
And that's why I wanted to pause there and say, it's not just this remote work concept and these things that are the drum that's being beaten on LinkedIn. At the end of the day, those spaces need to be purposeful, and they need to be planned well.
Absolutely. And the purpose may change and may be different from one organization to another. There is no one right size fits all.
Yeah.
The second theme that we identified, is how modern metrics are changing, and how we're moving away from planning space and measuring how we plan a space to measuring how the space is actually used, the reality of the space. The third theme that we feel that personally I'm the most passionate about is what we refer to as data management as risk management. Yeah. And what we did is we reflected back with clients and really kind of dissected the pain points over the course of the pandemic, and found that most of them were data driven or data related. And it stemmed from different organizations' level of data maturity, right? Like how good were they about keeping up their floor plans, their space assignments, things like that, and how that either supported their response to the pandemic or handicapped their response to the pandemic. And so those 3 themes, data management is risk management, modern metrics measure reality, and the purpose-driven flexibility, we framed up this year's report based on those 3 themes.
Awesome. So let's go to number 2. This is one that I am somebody who's a big proponent of this topic, meaning, again, I'm going to go back to my space planner days, and me, before I had a CAFM tool, actually doing departmental allocations by hatching it different colors by hand in AutoCAD. You're laughing because you've probably done that as well. We are moving, and I've seen this a number of times at different conferences. The talk track has really shifted over the last 5 years, I would say. It started to trickle in. I think the APAC region of the globe was much more ahead of their time in this kind of conversation in terms of what is the actual utilization? Show me my attendance. They started the neighborhooding concepts long before anybody else did. And as the pandemic came along, it kind of forced the rest of the world to really start looking at utilization metrics, meaning what I say is either how this is either attendance or how the space is used. as opposed to how is this space allocated? And if you could talk to that a little bit, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite topics. So we joke around, within our group that occupancy is not utilization. And the difference between those two is really the story of how that evolved. So you just mentioned that from the APAC teams, we saw, the first signs of using utilization data. And I agree that aligns with my experience and the data that I've seen as well, that they really kind of led the way. From an industry or sector perspective, it was also the technology organizations and the financial institutions that use data day to day in their business. So they tend to have a culture of data thinking, right? That adopted utilization first and saw the benefits of tracking utilization, on a portfolio wide or a building level, just depending on their own needs. I think though that because this kind of evolved organically over the last 8 to 5 years, and there wasn't a set definition or attitude or outlook towards utilization, for many years we have confused occupancy rates with utilization. And what we've traditionally done, as space planners, as occupancy management, as CRE reporting data-driven people, is we have reported occupancy rates. And occupancy has been based on the allocation of space. I'm going to assign one butt to one seat, and I'm going to consider that seat occupied. Well, that was great when we didn't think that seats could be shared. And that was great when we assumed assigning a butt to a seat meant the seat was going to be used. Those two things are no longer true. They weren't true 5 years ago either. But they're certainly not true now as more organizations adopt hybrid working. So we can no longer look at occupancy rates as a true measurement of portfolio performance. We have to look at utilization. Then that opens the door for what's utilization? How does one organization capture utilization data? How do they define it? How do they analyze? We see a lot of organizations capturing utilization at a building level because they only have access to badge swipe data. That's super helpful. That's a great gateway drug to measuring utilization, right?
Once you swipe into the building, you have no idea where they go, what spaces they're using.
No idea. So I'll share a little dirty laundry here. When I worked at Coca-Cola, I never went to my desk. You knew if you wanted to find me, you needed to go to Yetu, which was an amazing coffee bar. The Coca-Cola headquarters is beautiful. And I chose to camp out in that coffee bar all day long, right? So my utilization rate would have been high. But if you as a designer, as a space planner, wanted to make choices about what kind of space to build out, my data wouldn't have helped you because I wasn't sitting at the desk that you assumed I was sitting at. I was sitting at an open air coffee bar where I could collaborate and kind of meet and greet and socialize and work heads down in between, right? That was my work style on site. And I think it's true for a lot of other folks who want to go to the office to collaborate, to socialize, to build a network, and are going to grab little moments of heads down space in informal areas, not at a desk. So if you are not capturing utilization,
can I pause you for a minute?
Bring it.
Because you just made and this is a use case that I talk about that I don't think is talked about enough in terms of using utilization data to inform your workplace design. Because if you have that coffee bar that is a red spot on your heat map 5 days a week, you're going to want to figure out why and how you can design more of those types of spaces to be utilized. Then if you look at the cube farm that's in the upper right-hand corner of the building with no sunlight, that is constantly a green spot, you have to figure out how to bring some of those design elements over to that area, or maybe turn that area into something that's not necessarily an employee space or something. I think that's a use case that's not touched on enough in terms of utilization.
Well, then you'll enjoy reading the report. Got my little plug in there. So because one of the things that we've highlighted, and we talk to clients a lot about this, but one of the things that we highlighted in the Insights report is that utilization data isn't just about measuring your portfolio efficiency of the space, the utilization of the space. It's also about understanding your employee preferences and your employee work habits. But
and then what happens? What happens when you know that? What happens when you know that?
What are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with it? Don't just collect the data and let it, go stale somewhere. Yeah. You have to take that data and develop data-driven personas, right? Because it's that data that's going to tell us what employees really want, what their habits are telling us they want, not survey data, not the potentially biased focus group information, that kind of data that we've relied on in the past. That's super helpful and helpful information. We want to hear from employees what they say they want, but what we really want to do is then balance what they say they want with the actual data of what they do. And that utilization data helps us understand their habits and their preferences that are actually playing out in the real world. So like you said, we can build more of the types of spaces that attract them to the office, more of the types of spaces that they actually use in reality. And if we're doing this on an ongoing basis, we can always stay ahead of the trends and the evolving work habits and the evolving work styles, so that as we're refreshing space, we're doing it based on data, based on utilization patterns in the data, not our perception of what happened in the past, not our perception of what worked in the past. We're measuring based on, and we're planning based on reality, not based on, our perception of what happened and success.
But it also, and that's exactly what I wanted you to touch on. I definitely led the witness there. Because what it also does is, imagine if you're a young employee, a young professional, and you go on a tour of a place that you potentially are going to accept an offer letter from, and you see spaces, you're like, wow, they seem to really get how my generation wants to work. And then as you're walking through your tour, the HR person, the recruiter person says, well, we solicit this information via data that we track and we constantly refresh. It's going to make somebody feel like, well, this is a place I want to work. It's going to enable them to attract that talent. Don't you think?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, absolutely. I think people feel heard when they see the kind of spaces that they want to work in, right? They feel like, I found my tribe, these are my people, I want to work here. Absolutely. But it's not even just about the recruiting. It's about your business partners and the community and everybody else that's exposed to your space. More and more we see clients who use their headquarters space for community space. We see clients that are using their space as an extension of their marketing and engagement with customers. So, when you build a headquarters or a hub space, right, that is a manifestation of your brand, you're communicating to a whole bunch of different stakeholders, not just the people who work on site. And so you have to kind of open your mind up. I got
to stop you in a good way. I've done, this is now like my 12th episode of the podcast, I think. And, we've learned a lot over the last couple of years over the workplace. Say what you just said about say that again, manifestation of your space is a manifest. This is what I want out of the podcast, Gary, these nuggets. Like, I'm going to steal this. Your space, your physical footprint is a manifestation of your brand.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah. Your workplace is a manifestation of your brand. It's a manifestation of your culture. That.
I have not. It's culture part, yes, but that's so powerful. That is so powerful what you just said. Hang on, one more question. Who's done this well? Name a firm that is, I got to put you on the spot. Who's done this well? Whose headquarters have you walked into and say, this is a manifestation of their brand, and boy, would I love to work here or partner with these folks?
When I walked in, when I was considering going to work for Coca-Cola, and I walked into their headquarters building that had recently gone through their Workplace 2020 renovation, I felt exactly what they intended for me to feel. I felt surprise. I felt delight. I felt like the walls oozed Coca-Cola. And it wasn't like, syrup dripping from the walls and the ceiling and stuff like that. It was that this was the brand that I grew up with. This was the polar bear commercials and the Santa Claus. This was everything I thought about when I thought about Coca-Cola was somehow manifested itself in the personality of the building. It was in the fit and the finish. It was how they did the branding. It was the sense of humor in the graphics and the wayfinding as you navigated the building. It was this thoughtful integration of that brand identity into the physical space. And it made you kind of tap into this emotional connection that you had to the brand, which I frankly didn't even know I had until I, had to think about it, as part of, deciding whether or not I was going to go and work for them. I think they do it really well. I've seen a lot of organizations, those organizations that kind of live and die by brand out in the market, Nike, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, they bring that back to their internal employees, to their internal spaces, their workplaces, and they kind of live their brand in their workplace. And they provide those spaces that really, like we just said, manifest their brand in the workplace. And I think more and more, you see data-driven organizations use data really well in the marketplace. You see brand-driven organizations use brand really well in their workplace. They are integrating what they know, what they do out in the market into their work environments. And I think that those organizations that understand brand and brand loyalty are also really driven to prioritize the employee experience because they know their customer experience is so important to their success.
This is such a fresh perspective on everything that I've been talking about over the course of the last 12 episodes. This is something that it took me 12 episodes to drag this out. And I'm gonna give another plug here for the CBRE brand. I've been fortunate enough. I've worked with CBRE for years in one way or another. And I've been invited to CBRE's office spaces in San Francisco and Chicago. And when I think of the CBRE brand and I walk into those offices that sit atop these major metropolitan areas, and I walk in and I see the community spaces, I see the reception area, I instantly feel smarter. I feel lucky. I was like, who let me in here? Like, I'm probably I don't want to make a mess. I don't want to touch anything. I just automatically feel the CBRE brand because CBRE to me is the biggest, it's not to me, but CBRE is the biggest corporate real estate firm in the world. So they should have the best office space in the world. And in my opinion, even if you weren't with CBRE, I would say, well, I've been in CBRE spaces and their brand really comes through in their spaces because I immediately feel elevated when I walk into a CBRE space. I really do. Absolutely. Yeah.
And we hear a lot about the trend towards wellness in the workplace and employees wanting to feel like their organizations and their employees are making good cultural and political decisions, things like that. Yeah. All of that is a result of employees wanting to feel like they're doing something meaningful and that they're part of a work community that's meaningful, right? And being part of the brand, part of the energy is just an extension of that, right? They want to feel like they're doing meaningful work. They want to work in a place that, a physical space that represents the work that they're doing and the culture that they're a part of. It makes me feel smarter when I work in a place that makes you feel smart. And I like to feel smart. That is an emotional connection that workplace and your opinion of that workplace, that's an emotional connection I have based on that experience. That's powerful.
And when you said that, it evoked that sentiment where I've walked out of buildings and be like, wow, I feel like we had a really great day of, meetings and collaborative work and all that stuff. And a lot of it was just the environment, looking across the CBRE's building in San Francisco looks like something out of a movie. Like when you walk into the lobby, and the one in Chicago, you're looking at the corncob buildings, and you're looking out over the Chicago, the greater Chicago skyline, and it's just like you're sitting there and you're feeling inspired. And when you said that, I equated that to, and serendipitously or coincidentally, to my time in offices like CBRE delivers for their own internal employees. And it's so true. So let's talk about point number 3. Now that we covered point number 2, data management is risk management. This is another term that's near and dear to my heart, because we talk to our internal teams, our internal sales reps, our BDRs, and I say, he or she with the data is the one who wins, right? At the end of the day, you can't make informed decisions without the data. And that came to the surface over the last few years. Can you please talk about this a little bit?
Boy, did it. Thinking back over the last couple of years, chatting with clients about it, going through the experience with clients, we saw a lot of organizations struggle with responding quickly because they didn't have the data they needed. Yeah. We saw organizations, have to delay asking essential workers back to the office because they didn't know where people sat. They didn't know who was where, so that they could create social distancing plans that would allow them to come back safely. We saw organizations that didn't have, something as simple as an up-to-date floor plan so that they could do wayfinding to help people navigate buildings, elevator banks, things like that safely. Right. And for large organizations that are constantly carrying and feeding for their data, that wasn't an issue. Right. But so many organizations out there have not been able to prioritize real estate data management because of their scale, the size of their organization. When they have pursued doing that in the past, it was cost prohibitive. But now technology allows just about anybody, to be able to track that data. When we talk to clients about where they are in terms of data routines, data quality, data integrity, lots of organizations get it. They're feeding the data beast, and they're well down the maturity route. But we have so many organizations that still have to develop that skill set and that kind of culture of data thinking and the rigor around data governance. Those organizations really felt handicapped during the pandemic. They now understand that this isn't a once every 5 year kind of activity, or a once a year we're going to walk the building and have somebody note down on a piece of paper who sits where. Right there with you, babe. I did it too. And we still have some organizations that do that, but more and more they realize that that's not going to cut it anymore, because at the drop of a hat, you may have a geopolitical, you may have an emergency weather situation. These things are becoming more and more common. And so many disruptive events that are possible, right? But you may need to you may need to react at the drop of a hat, right? And you may need to do it remotely. And you may need to share information with the board. You may need to share information with emergency responders. All of those things require the care and feeding on an ongoing basis of your space data. But luckily, technology does a lot of that, where you and I used to have to walk the building with a clipboard. Now we can supplement that manual labor with some technology tools to make it easier. And, when I think about the insights report, right, and think about talking to clients about where we're going in the future of occupancy planning, that is the future, right? Taking the manual labor out, leaning on technology to do a lot of that tactical data gathering, data management, so that we can focus on the stuff that really matters. We can focus on occupancy strategy rather than occupancy planning, right? Getting away from the tactical, getting away from the manual, and getting into the more strategic meat of the conversation about utilization, about how the space is being used, about employee preferences and habits, not about who sits where.
Well, also to tack onto that, look at what publicly traded companies are now being required to do from a lease accounting standpoint, which started years ago, to report their leases on their balance sheets. So now they start to look at it more strategically. Well, if that building is only 40% utilized, let's get it off the balance sheet. Right. So there's that. Then what's coming next is the ESG requirements. It's environmental, social, and governance. How you plan that, it all ties into it. So if you have an inefficient building that's really raising your carbon footprint, you're going to want to get out of that building, because SEC is now looking at it and potentially is going to levy some fines because your carbon footprint is too significant, right? And then things like drive times to offices and all that other stuff. These metrics are beyond important. They've been erased from when we started all the way up to how even the SEC is looking at it, right?
Yep. But the things that you just mentioned, if you think about it, occupancy rates, occupancy data would not help you answer those questions. You need utilization data. You need the reality of how the space is being used, not how we planned for it to be used.
You got
right?
it.
And there, the ESG as a motivator, people want to work for companies that are doing good. They really don't want to work for companies that are perceived as doing bad, right? So, let's win by doing good, right? But we win, double and triple, down the line. It has a trickle down effect when your employees then feel that they're working with an organization that they can feel good and proud about working with. So it's not even just the financial win or the minimizing your legal risk, right? It's just like you win on so many levels, but you have to measure reality. You can't look at your seating plan and determine whether that's an effective use of your portfolio performance. Your seating plan, which is your occupancy data, is not going to tell you what you need to make smart decisions about, the portfolio performance. It all goes back to utilization.
It does. And that's where we are in this day and age. So let me ask you this, as we start to wrap up here.
Sure.
We talked about who did something well, right? And this one, I'm not going to ask you to name names. As you've gone through this, give me a story where you walked into a customer, a prospect, and you said, holy cow, this is a mess. Like, just give me, if you can, I would love, how bad was it? Have you seen, to the point where they had nothing, to the point where it was outdated by 5 years? Just give me a horror. It's Halloween time. Give me a horror story.
A horror story.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of those. And, when your business is to help. Oh yeah. When your business is to help people, you're usually being called by people who need help. Right. People don't call you as frequently to come in when everything's working really well.
You don't call a plumber when the sink's working just fine.
Right. Yeah. Come tell me how pretty my sink is. That doesn't work like that. So I think back to Q3 of 2020, kind of the height of the pandemic. And, when there was this angst about, well, our essential workers are making it happen. They're in the office, but we want to start bringing other people back in. But we still have to maintain social distancing. That was the busiest time during the pandemic, right? Because organizations needed help. And they didn't have floor plans. They didn't know where people sat. And client after client would come in and say, well, we've got these Dead Sea Scrolls down in the basement because we don't have a CAPM or an IWMS system. But we've got these, floor plans from 1979 when the when the building was built, and there's some sticky notes and, some floppy disks over here from this construction project. And then we think our furniture vendor has the latest layout in AutoCAD from 1989 when we reset the furniture, and, the admin of each team can tell you where people sit.
Wow.
And you're like,
How is that? I need to know. I need to call. I need the list so I can start calling these folks. It's just like, how is that? Well,
it's amazing.
I know how it's possible because what happens is our biggest in the technology world, right? It's particularly IWMS. Our biggest competitors do nothing. More often than not, people just say, all right, well, we've been operating on email spreadsheets and these hard copy drawings or these PDFs. So we're just going to keep doing that. We've gotten this far. So I always tell the younger generation, your biggest competitor is not who you think it is. It's do nothing. Your biggest competitor
is complacency.
Yes.
Yeah. It's the status quo. But more and more organizations, and I think that's one of the unplanned, outcomes of the pandemic was it kind of shook people awake and said, what got you here, what's been acceptable so far is no longer acceptable. Yeah. It's no longer acceptable because here's an emergency situation in which you were not prepared to respond. Yeah. And by the way, there will be more emergency situations in the future. So, if for no other reason than continuity of business, please be prepared. But by the way, there are so many other reasons to be prepared, to keep that data maintained. But for some organizations that have not been able to prioritize that in the past, that was a huge motivator and a huge wake-up call that you have to commit to a certain amount of care and feeding for that data in order to be ready and in order to keep the business in business during an emergency situation.
Yeah.
Risk management.
And Carrie, with that, we've gone for quite a bit of time here, and the time has flown. But what I want to do is call back to some of the things I heard here. And as we look at the Global Workplace Occupancy and Insights Report by CBRE, you are one of the 3 authors of that Insights Report. It's out now. We will be providing the links in our description of this podcast. We'll provide the links in the comments, and I will be resharing all over social in support of this report. What we see out of this report are 3 themes that you touched on: purpose-driven flex, modern metrics, and data management is risk management. But the biggest nugget that I took out of this was your physical space, your workplace is a manifestation of your brand, which I love so much. And I think if we look at all these key points and we take these and we go and read the insights report that you've provided to make generally available to the public, I think that can help set people on a course, much like Biff with his almanac, to set himself on a course to success. Going back to the future, I think reports like this and data like this are super important as we move to the future of occupancy planning, to the future of the workplace, to the future of the way we approach things. I can't thank you enough, Carrie, for spending the time with us today. I always try to end these with a little bit of gratitude. You are very well spoken. You have great anecdotal information and anecdotal stories to go along with the data-driven insights that you have. And I'm very grateful that you spent the time with us today. But more importantly, I'm very grateful that there are people out there like you and your team doing this work and providing it for free so that people can have their own version in the almanac to set themselves on a course for success. So good on you. You're appreciated in this industry for these things. And I really enjoyed the time we spent together today.
It's been a selfish pleasure. I thank you for the opportunity to stay connected and the invitation. And you are most welcome. We love this data and we love other people who love this data. So, whenever you want to geek out on the data, I'm happy to chat.
Heck yeah. So with that, this was Connected Conversations. That's Carrie Aldridge from CBRE. Go read the Global Workplace Occupancy and Insights Report. It's out now. And let us know what you think. Drop it in the comments. But again, I'm Bob Massachetti. That's Carrie from CBRE. This is Connected Conversations. We'll see you on the interwebs next time. Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.